Hi everybody, and welcome back to a new episode of Diagnosedan. Today we're working on a very beautiful old German lady, almost a quarter of a century old, but still looking fine. This car came from another shop, and the other shop told me that it's got a very weird ABS fault. At almost exactly 40 kilometers per hour, I think they said 40, the ABS light comes on, then you shut the car off, start it again, then it's gone, and then exactly like it's programmed to do that, at that same speed, the ABS light comes back on. Now they tried to diagnose the fault, but they found out they couldn't communicate with any of the modules other than the engine computer. So let's see if we can diagnose this one together. Now, a very important thing you have to do when you get a car in for diagnostics is talk to the customer. They can give you very valuable information. Now, in my case, the customer is the other shop. So I talked to them, and they actually did give me some very valuable information that can help us diagnose this problem. The other shop told me that this ABS problem didn't start overnight. There's actually some history to it. Now, it all started when this car started braking badly. The brake pedal felt very hard. Now, what happens on these models, when you don't maintain them properly, what will happen, because with every maintenance you need to clean out the plenum chambers, because especially in the fall, like right now, leaves will fill up the plenum chamber and they will clog the drains. Now that's exactly what happened on this vehicle. The drains of the plenum chamber got clogged and water could fill up in the plenum chamber. Now when that happens, in that plenum chamber there is a brake booster, and that brake booster can actually fill up with water, and that's exactly what happened on this vehicle. The brake booster filled up with water and didn't work anymore, and the pedal became very hard. So the other shop, they cleaned the drains, cleaned out the plenum chamber, and that problem was fixed. Now, by the way, if the drains are clogged and when the water rises, it can also make it into the car's interior. A lot of these water leaks can be avoided by properly maintaining the vehicle. But anyway, they replaced the brake booster with a used one because, according to them, BMW does no longer sell new brake boosters for this vehicle. I haven't checked, but it doesn't really matter because after that, the car was braking fine again. So they called the customer picked it up, and then the customer came back half an hour later telling them that above a certain speed, the ABS light turns on. Now the other shop asked me, or asked us, to diagnose the communication problem, and maybe we can restore communication. After that, when they can read fault codes again, they want to take a look at the ABS problem themselves. Now, I don't know how far we can get in this video, but maybe we can also take a look at the ABS fault later. Now, first of all, we need to confirm the customer complaint. Can't we really communicate with this vehicle? Maybe. I think they used an auto logic. There's something wrong with their scan tool, and the problem is on the scan tool side. So we need to confirm if we really can communicate with the vehicle, and after that we need to take a test drive to see if that ABS light exactly comes on at 40 kilometers per hour. Now let's start out by confirming if the scan tool really can't connect to this vehicle. Now, BMW used to use a round BMW specific diagnostic socket. They used that up until, I think, 2000, just before the 16-pin plug became mandatory. Now, on some years, they used both. So on some of these vehicles, you can find both a round connector and the OBD connector on the dash. Now, to clarify something, this particular vehicle does not have the BMW specific socket anymore. It only has the 16-pin plug underneath the dash, and that is located right here. Let me try to open it. There we go. I hooked up the scan tool to this vehicle, and the OBD port has got powers and grounds because my dongle is lit up. Now I tried to auto ID the vehicle, I tried to communicate with it, but no joy. The scan tool is giving me some suggestions to manually select the vehicle because it might be older than 98, but that's not the case. It really should auto ID this vehicle. So that's customer complaint confirmed. Now that customer did tell me that they could communicate to the engine computer if you go directly into OBD. So let's try that next. Now, when I don't select the BMW software, but when I select the OBD software directly, I can communicate with the engine computer just like the customer told us. Now, let's see if there are any fault codes stored. Let's read fault codes. Let's select BMW. And there is actually a fault code stored for the evap system. Now, I don't think that evap fault is causing our ABS issue, and neither it's causing our no-com. But it is customer complaint confirmed. We can't communicate or auto ID the vehicle, but we can communicate with only the engine computer through OBD directly. Now, the next thing we need to confirm is to see if that ABS light comes on at that specific speed. So let's go for a test drive next. So we are on a quiet piece of road on the industrial area, and the vehicle's warmed up. I just started it up. So let's gently accelerate until 40 kilometers per hour, and let's see if that ABS light comes on. Now let's accelerate. Yes, and almost exactly at 40 kilometers per hour. Let's find a spot to park the car. The ABS light comes on. Now, according to the customer, when we shut the vehicle off and give it some time to reset, the system will actually reset and the ABS light will go off again. So let's start it up again. Let's put it in park. There we go, and the ABS light indeed is off again. Now let's repeat the test one more time. Let's accelerate. And indeed, almost exactly at 40 kilometers per hour, that ABS light comes on. So that's customer complaint confirmed. So that's the test drive done, and indeed, almost exactly at 40 kilometers per hour, that ABS light comes on. It's really bizarre. Now, you can drive around for days and everything is fine, as long as you don't go over 40 kilometers per hour. Now, normally you would want to read fault codes in the ABS unit right now to start your diagnosis, but we can't because of the no-com. And that's exactly why the auto workshop got stuck. I don't know if it told you this before, but when I was a younger, slimmer Danny and still had white curly hair, I worked as a BMW specialist, and back in the day I saw a lot of these models and I've got a lot of experience on them. And to be honest, I have got an idea about the no-com because I've seen it before, but for the moment we're going to ignore that and we're going to do some basic checks. For the ones who don't have any experience on a certain model, to start this diagnosis from scratch can keep you occupied for quite a few hours, and maybe you can't figure it out at all because just like the other workshop, maybe you have to outsource it. Now, later in this video, I'm also going to show you if something comes into your shop you're not familiar with, how you can cheat a little bit by using our software. And with our software, you could have actually diagnosed this vehicle within 5 minutes. Now, all that later in the video. For now, let's start by doing some basic checks. Now, we already know we can't communicate with the ABS through the OBD connector. Now, back in the day, BMW did use CAN bus, and there is CAN bus on this vehicle, but it's mainly used for communication among modules and not for diagnostics. For diagnostics, there is a single wire system, so a single wire that runs from the ABS directly to pin 8 of the OBD plug. Now, the same is true for the instrument cluster. There's a single wire that runs from the instrument cluster to pin 8 of that diagnostic socket. Now, I think there are 4 or 5 modules connected to pin 8 on the diagnostic socket, and we tried to communicate with it, but that didn't work. Now, if you want to communicate to the rest of the vehicle, you actually have to go through pin 8 to the instrument cluster, and the instrument cluster is then the gateway, and through the instrument cluster you can communicate to the rest of the vehicle. So if you can't communicate with the instrument cluster, you can only communicate with 4 or 5 other modules, or at least normally, not right now. But the engine computer is the only one who has got its own dedicated pin, and that's probably why we can still communicate with it. Now, I'm assuming there's no communication at pin 8, but is there communication at the ABS module itself? So what I did, first of all, I hooked up a battery charger because the battery was getting low. And since we need to do some testing, I don't want to worry about the battery voltage. Now, I looked at a wiring diagram and I found the communication wire for that ABS unit. And it is a white with purple wire on this pin right here. Now, I back probed it, and I ran a wire directly to a breakout box and then to pin 8. Now, to that breakout box, I hooked up my scan tool. As you can see, the breakout box is connected to the OBD connector. So all this is just an extension cord with some pins where we can measure. So this is pin 8, as you can see right there, it says pin 8. So pin 8 is now directly hooked up to the ABS unit. So let's see if now we can communicate with it. So let's select ABS, and let's see if it's trying to communicate. We can see what's going on by these LEDs. So these are grounds, it's trying to communicate right here, it's trying to communicate there. But let's see if it's trying to communicate on pin 8. So at some point that LED should start to flash. That indicates that some form of communication is going on. So far it's doing nothing, and we're still not connected to the, oh, there it goes. There it goes, it just communicated and we're in. Let's read the fault codes. And there are 2 fault codes stored. DSC pre-charging pump and DSC pressure sensor test. Now for the ones who are curious, I hooked up the picoscope to pin 8 so we can actually see what that signal looks like. Now for the ones who got confused about all the other LEDs flickering, that was the scan tool trying to communicate to the vehicle, not the vehicle trying to communicate on those pins. The vehicle is communicating on pin 8. But the funny thing is, when I hit read fault codes on the scan tool, you see that lights start flickering. So back and forth, and you see every time I try to read fault code, there is a little package of communication going on. Now when I select read data stream, it has to communicate all the time. So right now you will see it communicating all the time. There it goes. And now by the way, I've got the Pico also hooked up to pin 8. And now we can see that signal. You can see it's a single wire 12 volt signal that's being pulled to ground. So this is what this signal looks like. So we now know that the communication signal is a 12 volt signal that's being pulled to ground. So when there's no communication, it's a 12 volt signal, and when there is communication, it's being pulled down. So right now, I've got no scan tool connected, nothing. We should see voltage on that communication wire. So I hooked up my multimeter. One side of the wire is hooked up to the communication wire, the other side is hooked up to chassis ground right here. And we're reading 11.2 volts. Now both the module and the scan tool send out 12 volts, so they strengthen each other. So anything between 11 and 12 volt is okay. Now let's move my lead from the module to pin 8, and remember that's exactly the same wire, because that wire runs from the module directly to pin 8. There's nothing in between. Or there is something in between, there's a connector in between, but we'll get to that later. But right now, we are reading nothing. So on that side of the wire, we're reading a voltage, but on the other end, we're reading no voltage. Now, what does this tell us? That tells us that somewhere in between, that wire is broken. So we now know the signal is at the module, but that wire doesn't make it all the way to pin 8. Now let's take a look at a wiring diagram. By the way, a big thanks to the guys at AllData for sharing this diagram with me, because diagrams for these older cars are hard to come by these days. Now we can see that there are 4 modules connected to that pin 8. It is the ABS, the instrument cluster, the EDC, and it is the steering angle sensor. Now, if one of those wires was broken, we could still communicate to the other modules, but not to that single one. Now, in the middle, there is a connector, and that connector is called X183. Now, since we're not able to communicate with any of the modules, I highly suspect something is going on with that connector. Earlier in this video, I told you that any technician without any experience on this BMW could have diagnosed the no-com issue on this vehicle within 5 minutes, maybe less, using DDTSB. DDTSB is the world's biggest database of known issues on cars that can be found on the roads in Europe. So European and Asian vehicles that drive around in Europe. Not only is it relatively cheap, but it's also super easy to use. Let me show you how it works. I easily selected the car we're working on using the license plate lookup that works for many different European countries. Now, if it doesn't work or your country is not listed, we can still do a manual search or we can enter a VIN number. Once we have selected the vehicle, we go to bulletins, and in this case, I select a symptom, diagnostic tool or diagnostic problems. I click search and we get several suggestions, but we're looking for the one at the bottom. Now, when we look at the symptom, the diagnostic tool cannot communicate with one or more units, such as instrument cluster and ABS. That's exactly what we have. Possible cause, poor connection in the solder connector X183. Possible solution, repair of that connection, and then we look at the problem description. The X183 solder connector is fitted under the lining at the entry to the left front seat of the car. Poor connection or corrosion often occur in this area, which can result in the diagnostic tool being unable to communicate with one or more control modules. Now, we get a beautiful picture of where that connector is located. We get a picture of the connector, and when we do some more reading, it also tells us about pin 8 and all we need to know to fix this problem. Now, assuming the bulletin is right, and we're about to find out because we're going to take a look at that connector, this didn't even take 5 minutes. Now, compared to diagnosing a problem like this from scratch, this will probably save you hours. Now, there's nothing wrong with diagnosing a problem from scratch, but you should try to do it as efficiently as possible, and that includes checking for bulletins and TSBs. Now, if there's no bulletin or TSBs, then go ahead and diagnose the problem from scratch. In the end of the day, you're running a business and you don't want to waste your time and you don't want to waste your customers' money. Now, in the next step, I need to remove the seat and remove the carpet. Once that's removed, we can take a look at that connector. I removed some bolts of the seat, I tilted back the seat, and I rolled back the carpet. There's also this piece of insulation that was over here, which I removed, and to be honest, everything is a little bit damp. It is wet. There's some water in here, and that probably has to do with the clogged drains in the plenum chamber. When the water rises, there are grommets where the wires go through that start to leak water into the interior. Now, that problem should be fixed when the drains are opened, but right now everything still needs to dry. Now, the connector we are looking for is underneath this plastic cover, so it's not this one, but it's underneath this cover over here. Now, there was a plastic nut which I removed, so now we can gently take a peek at that connector. And remember, we were looking for that white and violet wires, and right away we can see green crusties. Now, that doesn't look good. I don't know what's going to happen when we touch those wires, but we're about to find out because I'm gonna. Now, you guys have got a front row seat. Let's pull off this plastic cover and let's pull those wires and let's see what happens. Now, to be honest, they don't look in a great shape, but let's try it anyway. Let's pull it. Oh, look at that. That didn't even need pulling. Those weren't even connected. Now, the connector is totally lost. It's totally rotten. Now, the wires aren't in great shape either. Let's pull it. And, well, I can't pull them apart, but you can see that they're green all over. Now, what basically this connector does is just connect these wires together. So for now, I'm just gonna strip them down and join them together. And when that's done, we should have restored communication. In case you folks were wondering, yes, this is the cause I was suspicious of from the beginning of the video. I have seen this before, and that's because it's common on these vehicles, and that's also the reason there is a bulletin for it. For now, I've stripped them down, I've joined them together. Later, I'm gonna make this pretty, but for now, we should have restored communication. Now, each of the individual wires go to the modules, and one of those wires goes up to pin 8 of the diagnostic connector. So in the next step, let's see if we have restored communication. Now, as you can see, the scan tool automatically recognized the vehicle again, and it's scanning all the modules. Now, a lot of the modules are red, but that's strange considering we had that broken communication wires. Now, this problem is fixed. Let's have a quick look at that ABS fault, although the customer didn't ask us to fix that, but maybe it's something easy. Let's find out. There's a fault code stored in the ABS unit for the pre-charging pump and for the pressure sensor test. Now, we already knew that because in the beginning we cheated a little bit with that jumper wire. Now, these older style BMW ABS systems use a device called a pre-charging pump. Now, the pre-charging pump on this model is located right here. It is an hydraulic pump and it's electrically energized with two wires, nothing really fancy, and one side of it is hooked up to the brake fluid reservoir and the other side is hooked up to the ABS module. And I think it comes in either at this line or this line, one of the two. I'm not sure, it's been a long time since I worked on them, but what this pump does is, in case of an emergency, it starts pressurizing and feeding fluid towards that module to make sure enough fluid and enough pressure is present at that module in case of an emergency. Every time you start up the vehicle and start driving it, this system does a self-test. So it briefly, when you start driving it, it briefly activates that pump, and the pressure sensor in the ABS unit should register that rise in pressure of the pump. Now, it checks two things by doing this. One is the sensor, because if the pressure rises, the sensor should register it, but also if the pump is working, because if there's no rise in pressure, it could also be a faulty pump. Now, the funny thing is, if I remember correctly, it does this test at exactly 40 kilometers per hour each time you start up the vehicle. Now, we can easily check that pressure sensor by pulling up the data pit for the brake pressure in the scan tool. Now, I did that, and the next step, I'm going to hit the brakes briefly but hard. Now, normally when the engine is running with the brake booster, when I fully brake, I should reach about 80 bars. Now, the engine isn't running, so I'm not going to get close, but let's say I need to brake close to 40 bars. Now, I'm going to hit the brakes, and you guys take a look at that screen. I pulled up the graph for the brake pressure. I can see it, but I put it on the screen for you guys. So I'm gonna hit the brakes hard right now. The engine isn't running, so we don't have a brake booster, but I do reckon we should get close to 40 bars. Now, you guys have already seen it, but I gotta rewatch the footage. At one point, we were braking over 60 bars, and that's without the engine running and without the brake booster. So right now, I'm not doubting that sensor. That number seems about right. That means there's only one suspect left, and that is the pre-charge pump. I backprobe the connector for that pre-charge pump, and I'm going to hook up my test light to those wires, and I'm going to set it up that way so we can monitor the test light from inside the vehicle. Now, every time that test light is going to light up, that means the pump is being activated. Now, when we're driving and we see the test light light up, and the ABS light comes on right after that, that means that that pressure sensor doesn't see a rise in pressure. And that basically means there's something wrong with the pump. It either isn't supplying any pressure at all or not enough pressure. But let's do the test drive first. I hooked up that test light to the pre-charge pump, and when that pre-charge pump is being activated, that test light should light up. Now, sorry about my makeshift solution. I really hope you like my contraption, but hey, it works. Now, right now the ABS light is off, so let's accelerate, and I think that pump is going to be activated around the same speed as the ABS light comes on. So let's accelerate. You see, not activated, and the ABS light is still off. So let's go a little bit faster, and we're almost near 40 kilometers an hour. There the pump is being activated, and bam, the ABS light comes on immediately. So it really doesn't like what that pre-charge pump is doing. Now let's see if we can do that one more time. Let's reset it. And the system should reset itself again. Is the ABS light off? Yes, it is. Now let's accelerate again. Again, ABS light still off. I need to be careful because I'm going through a corner. Let's accelerate. It comes on, and bam, there is our ABS light. So the fault is definitely, or has definitely, something to do with that pre-charge pump. We're back from the test drive, and as you can see, when the pump was energized, the ABS light came on immediately. Now also when we take a look at the fault codes, it says pressure sensor test. Now the pressure sensor is actually tested by activating that pump, and we also have a fault code for the pump itself. So I think it has something to do with that pump. Now I don't want to get too carried away because the customer actually didn't ask us to diagnose the ABS problem, but let's take a quick look at that pre-charge pump. Now I want to see if the pump actually works at all by supplying it with a power and ground. So I took out the power probe, hooked one side up to the negative, and I'm going to supply it with a positive, and we should be able to hear the pump run. And I don't know if you guys can hear that, but that pump actually runs. Now when that pump runs, the pressure in that ABS module should rise. So when we run that pump, we actually should see an increase in pressure on the pressure sensor. So I pulled up the data pit for that pressure sensor. I'm going to hit record, and we're going to take a look at that while I energize that pump. There we go, and energizing it. And we see a little rise in pressure. It goes from, I don't know, 0.3 to almost 3 bars, but this pump should supply, I think, between 10 and 15 bars, so it's not supplying enough pressure. So I really think we've got a faulty pump. Now I quickly removed the interior filter, which is over here, and underneath is the brake booster. It's a little bit dark, but this is the brake booster. Now before I condemned that pump, I was thinking, if they replaced that brake booster, they probably had to remove, let me take a light, they probably had to remove that master cylinder right there. And as you can see, there are some witness marks. I think, yeah, they definitely removed it. So if they removed that master cylinder, did they properly bleed the system? Because there is a special procedure to bleed this pre-charge pump. Now, of course, typically this is what the lock nut looked like. Totally stripped out. Lucky me. Fortunately, I've got a set of these, and I had a lock nut that fitted perfectly. Now, just to be sure, I removed the wheels off camera because there might be children watching. Anyway, this is my setup. I've got the brake bleeder connected to the reservoir, ready to go. I've got my spanner ready to go. Now, while we're bleeding the system, we have to activate that pre-charge pump. Luckily, with the Topdon, we can. Now, let me get the microphone close to it and activate it. So you can hear the pump is activated. So let's bleed the brakes properly, and hopefully the car is fixed. If it's not, we're going to call it a bad pre-charge pump. The brake bleeder is running. I've got the valve opened. Brake fluid comes out. You see right there, it's filling up. We're activating the pre-charge pump with the scan tool. Now I'm going to repeat this process a couple of times until I think the brakes are free of air, and hopefully then the car is fixed. I bled the brake system as good as I could, and I have got the brake pressure sensor data pit up again. I'm going to manually activate the pump, and we're going to look at the pressure right now. No, the pressure got a little bit higher. We're close to 3.5 bars. Not nearly enough, so it's confirmed we have got a crappy pre-charge pump. We probably bled the brake system, but unfortunately that didn't resolve our issue. I even went for another test drive and bled the brakes again, but unfortunately no joy. Now it's winter here, so it's dark early. Right now it's dark out. It started raining, it's cold, and to be honest, I want to be on my couch having a beer, but here we are going above and beyond for the customer. We diagnosed and fixed his no-com issue, and even though he didn't ask for it, we also diagnosed his ABS system with a faulty pre-charge pump. Now in the end, I was able to find a document from BMW on this pre-charge pump which states that the pressure should be between 10 and 15 bars. Now on this pump I have seen nothing over 4 bars, so we definitely have got a crappy pump. Once this pump has been exchanged for a good one, this car is fixed. Now, if you also want to fix cars more efficiently and diagnose them more efficiently, and you want less stress, there's a link for the Diagnosedan Tsb software in the description of this video. If you want to learn more about it, go to Diagnosedan.com. Now, I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please subscribe to my channel, and when you hit the little bell, you will get a notification each time I upload a new video. And remember, Diagnosedan fixed it again, or at least the no-com issue. See you next time, guys. With the vehicle, and after that, they wanted to this is what the lock nut used. The lock nut. But anyway, this is my setup. I've got the Blake. Now the Blake breeder. We bled this brake. We bled.